options. So this is really trying to get us away from there's one way to do anything, and actually there's hundreds of ways to do everything, and it's kind of up to each and everyone to figure out kind of what works best for them. So that's the thinking behind this. As previously, I'm just going to kind of moderate, and what we'll do is we'll jump between some of the questions we've been collecting, but if more come up that are on the same kind of topic, feel free to chuck your hand up and we'll just bounce it around, because it's not supposed to be just a me and the panel kind of session. This is just your chance to get involved and make sure you don't go home with any questions unanswered, or unasked at least. Can't promise we'll answer everything. So I hope that sounds good, and I'm going to kick off with one that we had before around the profitability of dairy transitions. So that was one for Miah, just to carry on there. And I guess there's your specific example, Miah, but also perhaps thinking about other dairy farmers that might be in different situations and the things to consider and manage through that.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to do them trials with the seaweed, and I thought if I just did that, then it wouldn't be that profitable if you transition just cold turkey. That's when I sort of, like the first year I just dropped my nitrogen by about 40 units, and I added biologicals and also lime and all of that together. And that was straight away, our profit actually went up that year. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I just used less nitrogen and profit went up. And then last year we went once a day, so our production was down quite a bit. But I think we were still very profitable, but if we had stayed twice a day, we would have made more money. And then this season, our production is back up to, we'll probably be 5,000 short of what we were doing on twice a day. So just as time goes on, that side of it's going to be fine. And our costs have just come down that much. I think it just makes you more profitable, because we're sort of, I don't think what we're actually making money out of it. At what stage weren't we? Never things we used to look at. With fertiliser, we might have put on 400 or 500 kilos of superphosphate. How do you know at what stage you're making money out of that and when you aren't? So I think now it's easier to make money. We're more in a low payout, we'll make more money than we ever did, for sure. In a high payout, we'll be close. Yeah. And
so there's probably a bit of a learning there around having trials rather than running out and doing the whole farm right off the cuff there. Do you think?
Yeah,
do you think? I suppose, how did your thinking change between when you first came back all inspired and Jenny kind of tamed your ambition there, and where you ended up 4 years later in terms of your ability to actually to manage that transition profitably?
Yeah, no, that's pretty important to do that trial. I mean, because I didn't know any coaches or consultants like Jules or anyone at that stage. So if we had someone there to bounce ideas off, because Christine was only in the country once every few years, so, and she's a pretty busy lady. So I had to do it myself, but if I had a coach who knew their shit, I would have been straight into it. Yeah, that's probably the difference. Because there's Jules said it earlier, if you get the four sort of things right with your management, your biology, and then you get your minerals right, and also your diversity in your pastures, if you do all them four things can happen quite fast. Where I started out, I was just doing one or two of them things. So if you get all 4 or 5 things happening at once, you can change your farm really fast.
Cool, I think it's a great segue to another question we had basically around sheep and beef transitions. So I wonder if Guy and Jules, kind of on a similar vein, like, knowing what you know now, I guess it's where do you start, what are the things to watch out for? Obviously that depends kind of on your knowledge base and your confidence there, but have either of you got any thoughts? And we'll come back to that on the cropping side as well. So kick off the Guy.
Yeah, similar thing, like if you've gone from a high end use, pretty much takes 3 years to transition. Like, it works a bit like a drug. Like, once the plant's so used to getting water solubles and free N, it gets pretty lazy. So to just go cold turkey, the system will fail. It's like, you know, you've seen movies with drug addicts and they go off and it doesn't go so good, you know, and there's ways to transition them through in rehab. It's basically rehab. So yeah, these things take a bit of time, and then there's the biologies and stuff that you can stimulate to get there faster, but understanding it's the key before you start.
I don't really need to repeat what's been said, but I think the main thing is just diagnostics and know where to put your time and energy, because both of those have a cost. So either get a farmer who's a little bit ahead of the game than you are in a similar situation, and realise that just because something worked for one person doesn't necessitate that that's the tool or what you're pulling out of the box is going to work for you. So diagnostics, I think, is a really big part of it.
Awesome, thanks Jules. And I suppose to Ross and Simon, a lot of the cropping operations are often pretty high cost in terms of what's going in. So based on what you know now, for a conventional cropping system, for example, are there kind of profitable wins right off year one? Is it an investment strategy from that side of things? Is that context dependent? And I guess what are the biggest risks based on your experience?
Probably in my case, we had some wins straight off the bat, which were really exciting, and then a few other things that that sort of show us we're going to require a bit more caution, and they're things we might have to revisit when we're a bit further down the track. For example, we grew some cereal with sort of 40% less fertiliser and adding in biostimulants, and straight off the bat that was our best we've ever done on the farm. Reasonably similar profit, so we'd kind of swapped inputs, but it showed the direction we could take. So that was exciting, and then the second year we tried to do the same thing with a ryegrass seed crop in the same paddock, but we found we couldn't reproduce that. We just couldn't. Our soil wasn't progressed enough to make that a successful crop. So it's going to require a lot more knowledge and time, and be quite situation specific, probably crop specific. I'm finding the transition in the livestock a lot easier.
Yeah, cropping operations are a very, very complex machine. They have very, very many moving parts compared to, dare I say it, grazing operations are relatively simple by comparison. I think the goal from the outset has to be clear. You have to do your homework as to what you want to achieve before you start, and then you have to build a house for the microbes essentially, and that involves reducing tillage, and then eliminating tillage, I think, is the key starting point. I don't have a lot of experience with transition because we've just been changing gradually over a long period of time. But I think looking at the base fundamentals, I mean, in a cropping farm, it is highly intensive, and soil needs to be able to drain, but it also needs to be able to hold water. So I would be starting with comprehensive soil tests before I did anything, and find out what you have got. And I know it's controversial, but I think the Albrecht theories around calcium, magnesium certainly hold true on clay soils. I can't speak for other soils. The horse farm that I illustrated, when I bought that, it only had 46, I think it was 46 base saturation of calcium, but had 25% base saturation of magnesium, and even when it was wet, you just about had to hammer the spade into the ground. So 4 years and 10 tonnes of lime per hectare later, and you can slide the spade in even when it's dry and it's starting to drain and hold water properly. So I think, you know, there's quite a few things that need to be considered, because you are intensively dealing with the soil all the time. And the other thing is building soil carbon. And there's two basic types, in very simple terms, two basic types of soil and of carbon in the soil. There's the recalcitrant carbon, which is old, stable, stored carbon, and you have labile carbon, which in a transition is far more important, because your labile carbon pool is the mobile carbon. It's the carbon that cycles in and out of the soil with the seasons and the crops. And by storing the residue on the, on the surface of the soil, you allow the soil organisms to then take that carbon in, and that carbon provides an energy source for the microbes, which then allows that exchange of nutrients through the soil, and it also they leave behind enzymes and, you know, quorum sensing agents which stimulate the biology. So I haven't really answered the question, have I? But I think, you know, gaining an understanding of what you need to, the house you need to build for your microbes and soil biome essentially to live in, to give you that biological function. Once you're further down the track, then you know, on the home farm I haven't used any phosphate fertiliser for nearly 10 years, and interesting, I had a Ravensdown agent, the rep, and I don't like to give them a hard time because they're just fresh out of university and they're full of, you know, they've been given a new car to drive around in, and they're all sort of happy with the religion of the fertiliser company. But anyway, so I had this paddock and I stopped putting, and it had an Olsen P of I think around about 25, and 3 years later it was 35, and 3 years after that it was 50. And I said, "Oh, what do you think of this?" "Oh, that's great." And I said, "Well, I haven't put any fertiliser on. What's going on, do you think?" "Oh, yeah." So it's a bit of a blank stare at that stage. "Oh, it's an anomaly." Well, it's happening all over the farm. So, you know, my Olsen Ps are running in that sort of 20. Anything between 17 and 25 is plenty for cropping. Any more than that's a waste. But so I think, you know, just getting that soil building in that organic matter, getting that organic matter cycling, getting that carbon cycling through the soil, that's the start. That's what you have to achieve. And it might be a fact of reducing tillage and initially incorporating stubble in the top layer. Don't incorporate deep, but just in the bioactive layer, and that just stimulates that biology to get going. And use the agri-seal and plenty of fish hydrolysate and all those other things just to stimulate that biology, because that's where you get your function and your production from, and your cycling of nutrients.
Awesome, thanks very much for that. So there's some takeaways there around not going cold turkey, unless you really know what you're getting yourself into and that's what you want to do, but be prepared for that. And just an emphasis there at the end there around really understanding what you're working with and what you're trying to achieve, and, you know, and actually having a plan for how to get there, and I guess knowing what potential things you might need to address based on the mismatch from where you start with those two things. So those are my takeaways. Got plenty more questions on here, but anything else popping up from the crowd off the back of that discussion?
Are you guys baling or chopping grain residuals? Or straw, sorry.
This year is our first year chopping residuals. We baled a bit of pea straw for strong market demand. So we're about 50-50 this year, but that we'll aim to retain more and more as we go on.
I just put the spreader on the back of the header and spread it on the paddock. Ryegrass straw, the sheep will take care of that. Cereal straw, I mulch. I run through with the stubble mulcher, get it a nice bed. Well, initially after harvest it's about that thick. 3 weeks it's that thick. 10 weeks it's just about gone.
So it's eating it, yeah.
Awesome. And then we had another question before, and probably one for Ross actually, around your experience of transitioning from heavy cultivation into more of a direct drilling. So what are the challenges you've been aware of, and what have you done to, I guess, try and get the best outcome in that situation? Because I know there's had a few full cultivation cropping farmers at field days and that kind of stuff, really struggling with what those first set of steps are, going from full power-based tillage mostly into where they want to get to, which is a direct drill situation. So you would love to know what your experience is there.
So my experience has been coming out of a farm with a 100-year history as a dairy farm. Everything was pretty tight, and it's a poorly drained farm to start with. The stage I was at the time told me the best way to get cropping would be to get the plough out, and I did that on probably 60% of the farm. And because I've been sort of talking a lot with the cross lot boys in the Wairarapa, I did the other 40% with the cross lot. And yeah, results I've always got better results with the cross lot, and digging holes behind it is significantly better. But being quite a slow learner, I ploughed quite a bit the second year as well, because we had still going into paddocks that were pugged and had ruts and stuff from silage wagons and whatnot. So we ploughed those, ploughed in some rushes, and then we got 250 mils of rain from 19th of November to Christmas Day, and we made just one hell of a mess, and we're only just starting to undo that damage. So my experience is just go cold turkey with a direct drill, maybe subsoil aerator, pretty handy machine that I think goes in conjunction with a direct drill really well. But my advice would be to be cold turkey.
Awesome. Cheers, Ross. We had a question down the back, if you've still got it.
I'm going to hold it.
Okay, awesome. Andre.
Just on that, I just wonder whether there's a point where, especially Simon, would you think there's a point where you risk having too high organic matter levels and you feel that it's beneficial to go in cultivate?
Not if your labile carbon pool's active, and no, but you need to keep that carbon pool active, because as Miah has illustrated, the way to get carbon into the soil is through the root exudates and getting those roots down there. But it's that with the cropping, it's the labile carbon pool at the top of the soil is equally important. But I can't. Are you sort of thinking along the lines of you might eventually generate peat, which is only created in anaerobic conditions? But I don't think you could have too high organic matter. It would start to oxidise away before then anyway.
I just comment I had from a farmer in the UK that I worked with that once he got over 14%, he put a plough through it to reduce the cold. It was beneficial to start again. Well, the owners actually speaks a lot of these sort of things. I just never got into why he would do that really.
I couldn't comment on his rationale other than to say mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun.
Cool, awesome, thanks for that. We're going to switch back to the pastoral crew quickly, and we had a question from Andy before around basically we've got an northern flush and use feed squirting out the back of the ewes and they're getting dirty, but you drench the hobbits and they're coming out clean. What might be going on there, based on your understanding, Jules, my guide? And I suppose, how do we reduce the what's coming out? Well, how do we harden up what's coming out the back end of the ewes in that kind of situation on that freshwater feed?
I suppose again it comes down to the same thing we've all been talking about. The more you understand the system and what the causal agents of things are, the better. And if you've come out of a dry summer and feed's been short, and then you get that little bit of moisture, your pastures will be high in nitrates, and we know how those come out the back end of any animal, fairly squirty fashion. So I suppose firstly it's knowing, are they carrying a worm burden? Is it due to that? Is it due to high nitrates? Is it, what's the causal element there, and from there you can do some decision making. I mean, it could be trying something like humates. If it is high nitrates, maybe just supping up some of those excess nitrates by offering them something like humates. But, you know, I can't, without doing those diagnostics, I can't tell you what the cause is, so therefore I can't tell you what the action would be. But I think understanding is the crux of all this, and I think we've given, as farmers, we've given over our power to the expert coming down the driveway telling us what to do. So I'd be asking myself, what do I need to understand and who do I need to be talking to? And I think Steve, sitting in the audience here, is one who could probably answer that question better than me.
It's just funny how that's the hoggets that had a drench, and that's no deep clean from the user.
Are they both on the same type of feed?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all grass system.
Yeah, it's pretty hard when the one's doing one and one's doing the other, but I'm always cautious, and a thing that I've probably fluked a bit this year was just that bit of roughage through the U rotation that probably hold things up. So yeah, they just need a bit of roughage. But Steve's got something to say. He's going to jump in.
I've got one more thing too.
It comes mainly from a dairy point of view, and it can be difficult to implement on some of the steep country the Andes on, and whether you've got it there, but it's hay, and the hay to balance up that. So particularly important in the dairy situation, we've got the flushes in the spring and the autumn, and there should be hay available 24/7, and as part of getting that crude protein sort of at a more manageable level for the animal, you're always going to have these flushes. So that probably help the ewes in there. But there's something else there to know, I think, you know, because how your hoggers have responded to the drench, and the others haven't. Well, haven't had drench, so.
I think that points to another thing, is when we keep our pastures, you know, it's like if I just fed you ice cream, you probably wouldn't do so well, and sheep like us need a real diversity in their diet, and I think when we get those flushes of feed and there isn't that diversity of a carbon source to balance it out, takes a lot of energy for an animal to process all that excess protein, and yeah, it doesn't sit well in their digestive system.
Awesome, thanks very much for that. Actually, keep in mind, Jules, because we had a question earlier about why you left your lambs on so long, right through until February, or even later, I think.
I would have left them longer, except for we wanted to put the ram out and breed a few ewes earlier. There was no need. The ewes were still milking, and those lambs were growing like gangbusters, and we had plenty of feed. So there was no need to do that. And I think, again, you know, I like to question the status quo. Everyone tends to do the same thing, wean at the same time, have the same process, and I'm probably a little bit different. It's like, well, I'm going to try something else. So if there's not a need, and I think the other thing, leaving young stock on their mums longer, is feed changes and feed quality and type changes throughout the year. Young stock learn from their mothers, so if they can learn what to eat, when to eat it. It's like right now we've got our cows and calves, grass is growing like mad, and we've got them shut up on baleage and hay, because I want those young calves to learn to eat baleage and hay now while they're on mum before we wean them. So again, it's what's your bigger picture and what are you looking to do.
Awesome, thank you. I guess just on that, like, what's the situation where you'd wean them in late December, early January, for example? What would be the conditions where you'd do something like that, which is, I guess, more of a traditional approach?
I think if there's a need to prioritise feed, and if growth rates on your lambs are your priority because you need to get them off, or they're the priority because in our case you want to get them grown and get them bred. So again, it's that bigger picture, and what are your priorities and how do you rank them?
Awesome. Any questions popping up for anyone quickly before I move on to the next one? Cool. All right, bit of a segue here, and I think it's just as relevant for the cropping side as well. How do you choose what species to plant in your sward? So if you're sowing, if you're getting a drill out or broadcasting or whatever, however you're doing, how are you selecting what you're going to sow? Now, Guy, you don't sow anything, so this is, we can leave you out here, unless you think you've got something to say. Otherwise, the same would be true for in a cropping situation. Simon, how you're actually selecting, on what basis you're selecting the plants that you put in. You did touch on it briefly in your presentation, but you might get a chance to elaborate. Miah?
For me, first off, I just want to get over that 9. So 5 grasses, a couple of herbs and a couple of clovers, maybe 3. And a good place to start is go and have a look on the side of the road and see what you've got there. I mean, you'll be able to get better varieties to sow, but we've got prairie grass, cocksfoot, there's paspalum, I don't sow that, but fescues, and all of that sort of thing. I know they do well, so that's sort of where I started, and then I got a bit of advice from the seed guy, and it's quite weird because sometimes you plant it and some things don't come up, and then you let the pasture recover properly, and the next year there it is. So quite bizarre, but yeah, that's how I started anyway.
I think I'd just add to that, if you've done, I know I keep banging on with the word diagnostics, but if you've done your diagnostics and figured out what are those limiting factors, and if perhaps it's compaction, you might choose plants with those big deep tap roots so you can open up the soil. It could be nutrient cycling. You might want to plant some of your annuals, like your oats, to get some of your phosphorus, or your cycling. So I think, again, do those diagnostics. Is your soil a blow-away soil? Do you need something that's going to really hold on to it? What are those conditions? And then what are your production needs? Do you need a large volume of feed, or do you need a quality of feed? What's the timing on it? So I think there's lots of questions that happen before you get to the answer, and we tend to want the answer first, but I think slow down a little bit is probably a good thing to do, course of action.
Yeah, can't add too much to that. Look at what outcomes you want and select on that basis. So I normally want to have sort of multiple purposes. I want good grazing performance. I want them to suit my environment, which is very dry, so it has to be hardy, so I stay away from ryegrass and look more to those cocksfoots and prairie grasses and whatnot. And I try and have a mix of annuals and perennials, and a mix of rooting depths, because on those stones I don't have much opportunity to address compaction issues. And then one point on the cropping farm where I've got to be careful not to get myself into trouble and go too widely, bearing in mind that we grow some seed crops, so I need to rein things back a bit. I've been going pretty wide selections there, but I really need to pare it back and make sure I'm going to be able to continue to grow seed crops.
Yeah, I don't have any perennial pastures at all. So my maximum length for cover crops are in the ground is 6 months. So I don't want any perennials. After the cropping, the winter, spring, summer, so if you autumn planted cash crops, are the only things that are going through the winter that are going to make a crop. So the cover crop phase of the rotation is for the soil primarily, and secondly it is to feed animals through the winter. And when you come out of the cropping phase, we don't use any chemical in the autumn going into the cover crop stage, so we'll graze very intensively and bare the ground off so that we can get an establishment, and I'll only use annual species. Generally there are half a dozen species of so-called weeds in the paddock, so there's 6 to 10 species before you even get the tractor out of the shed. So all I'm interested in adding is oats, vetch, lupins, buckwheat and annual clovers, whether that be berseem or crimson. And for some of the same reasons, we've got to avoid anything that's going to contaminate or create problems for phytosanitary requirements for seed production. But I just want to get that that massive growth going, get those roots down, and I'll use lupins instead of vetch where I'm going into peas, so that we're not following a mycorrhizal legume with a mycorrhizal legume, because lupins are non-mycorrhizal. They also punch a root down like crazy. I live in an area where a lot of hybrid radish seed crops are grown, so any sort of radish in the mix is complete no-no. And you know, you stock guys, I don't think there is any hybrid radish growing up here, but if you're in an area where they're growing and you're within 10 k's of a cropping farm, probably using radish isn't a great idea because it's incredibly promiscuous. But so yeah, it's just bearing in mind that you've always got some weed species there, and they're adding diversity and they're important in that phase. And it's amazing how palatable once, you know, things that are weeds in a monoculture ryegrass stand, once they're in a diverse mixed pasture, suddenly become palatable. And you know, it's to do with the diversity of the biome. So it's, for a cropping farm, it's about building that labile carbon pool, getting those roots down, getting that soil open, trying to capture as much of that winter rainfall as possible, so you're not having problems with leaching or runoff, and then producing feed for your animals over the winter.
Awesome, thanks Simon. I would just mention there's actually a couple of like online, there's one in the UK and one in the States that have quite cool pictures of the different root systems for different species in there. You know, if you're looking at trying to build something together, obviously seed reps probably have that kind of knowledge too. I find it quite cool, and one of the projects I'd love to actually do is actually a farmer-sourced kind of cover crop species guide, where you know farmers in different parts of the country talking about what they've used, the results they've got, you know, what rates we should be sowing them at, and different experiences. But so that's something we've got on the wish list. So hopefully one day we can do that to help us get through that kind of question. Oh,
sorry, I should say Phacelia is a real go-to. That goes pretty much everywhere all the time, and it produces a massive amount of very, very fine roots, as I showed you in the slide. Plus, buckwheat's really good for mobilising phosphorus. So is Phacelia. Actually, so are lupins. So they're all quite good. Mix of legumes and grasses and things.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Any questions bubbling up before I carry on? Yep, down the back.
To increase multi-species on steep hill country and ground top,
I'll just repeat that question. Increasing species diversity on steep ground top dominated hill country?
Just lima. Lima and greys, yeah, like you talked about it before, like those aluminium accumulating plants, like you're not trying to get rid of them, you're trying to make them palatable. But I have done a few slurry mixes with clovers through the spray nozzles you can use around seed, so clovers and chicory and plantain. Flying them on in a slurry goes pretty good. But yeah, the animals are your big driver of it, so use them to sort it out. That goes back to a lot of the density grazing, high density grazing stimulates it. I know there's been a lot of work done with like putting them in night areas. I've seen a bit about that. So they're basically putting up a fence on a piece of hill country that's not really performing, and putting a heap of stock in there overnight, like pretty tight to it, and then let them go in the morning, and that come back a month later, and that whole piece of ground looks totally different. So the stock density is the biggest driver.
Yeah, I suppose I'll just add that. I suppose I've seen farmers that are basically camping animals on dry north faces and that kind of stuff, potentially during like rain and things like that as well, just to create a bit of, I guess you call it positive disturbance, is what they're talking about. So just to try and create those conditions for things to germinate. And the other one, I guess, is the kind of planned deferred grazing, just to try and, if those other species are there that you do want them to come and live with you on the ground top in that situation, then actually just giving them the opportunity to actually fully express themselves, I suppose. Albeit there have been a few lessons learned around when, like what paddocks you're deferring and when, people deferring dry north faces in the spring, for example, and then basically eating hot Wairarapa nor'westers or Hawke's Bay or Canterbury nor'westers, and they're just, like, regardless of how well you manage them and that kind of stuff, they're just not really set up to ever hold quality because of that. So thinking about that in terms of so there might be other times of the year where it's a better idea to let those kind of faces recover a bit longer. Just my 2 cents on that one. We're going to change tack a little bit. We had a question before around leaching and environmental impact, I guess. So I've heard from most of you that most of you talked about the profitability of your systems, either during or post-transition, still being good. So another part of the equation that keeps coming up is around environmental impact. So, and I know at least a couple of you have some good data on that kind of stuff. So maybe starting with you, Simon, and working our way. Oh, actually, no, Miah, you got the mic. So we also had a question around erosion. So if you can talk to basically leaching, erosion, and any other environmental impacts, and if you've just got observations or data that you can share with us.
I do know that I supply Wairarapa, which is we've got 100 suppliers for that company, and I know I'm in the bottom 2 for N leaching and P loss. So obviously it's better environmentally than what we used to be doing. I didn't go down this road for that reason, but it's quite a nice consequence. And erosion, not on our pumice soil. If you do work it up and there's a rain on the hills, we used to lose a lot of soil doing that. So going away from that is definitely better for the environment and losing topsoil. So
yeah, I think this regenerative ag stuff is sort of the no-brainer as far as environmental stuff goes. Like, and everyone just being aware of the negative impacts of poor operations. So knowledge is the key, and just this whole group here, everyone knowing how to reduce those impacts is the key to do it. So it seems like the no-brainer, but the uptake seems to be still pretty slow. Don't know why.
I think I'll just add to that. I think we're slow to uptake things often when we don't understand as well as we could, and I think when more farmers really understand that the soil is a living organism and it is the biology in the soil that makes the glomalin and the glues that keep our soil attached to the earth, as well as they're responsible for that nutrient cycling, and we lessen our need for salt-based or acid-based fertilisers that are highly volatile and highly leachable. The automatic fallout of that is the lessening of not only a loss of our topsoils, which I gather we lose at 192 million tonnes a year annually, and 44% of that's off our pastoral land. So as pastoral farmers, we are also equally responsible alongside our cropping partners to ensure that that which sustains our life stays where it can do its job. It's really important.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add, except a moment for me probably was when we were still doing a fair bit of ploughing close to the lake, and then we got that 250 mils of rain in 6 weeks, and my neighbour, who's got a wetland on the edge of the lake, asked me if I wanted my silt back. And it sort of makes you realise that yes, I do want my silt back, and we'd better start working to keep it there.
Yeah, I've got a nutrient discharge consent. Our catchment was the first in the country to have such a requirement, and my calculated nitrogen loss is 3 kilograms per hectare. And in order to achieve that, we had to double the amount of fertiliser that went on, because Overseer kept saying, cannot compute. No, with that level of production, you must be putting on more fertiliser than that. So we did, and it made the calculation work, and I was able to get my consent. So, and I have had an A grade audit result too, which is good. And A is good. D is bad. But I think it's interesting thinking about the soil loss equation. One of the reasons I manage my harvest residue the way I do, and putting that blanket of straw on the soil with a short stubble, is because that prevents any wind blow. We get some pretty severe winds where we are, and one problem is if you're leaving your residue on, once it's mostly decayed, it then becomes very light, and if you get a strong wind, the kinetic effect of that material moving down the paddock dislodges soil, and you create soil movement that way, and we've eliminated that problem. But if we're losing 192 million tonnes of topsoil through erosion a year, there's a real opportunity for the fertiliser companies, because all that fertility's got to be replaced. You know, if you take it out, you've got to put it back.
It's a great model.
Well, hey, thank you. Right, with everyone's permission, we're going to run just another 10 minutes. So just 10 past 3, we'll wrap up there. And we've got two main focuses. One, talk about trees, because we had a cool question about trees before. And then there was one around soil carbon emissions, climate change, for example, and diving into that, what the opportunity is based on the experiences of the panel. And if that's okay, we might you might have to hit up Simon or Ross about the organic cropping one afterwards. Sorry, just running out of time there. So I'm going to kick off with trees, which is actually a pet favourite of mine. If I could, my first love is trees, and the second one's grazing, but you've got to get the grazing right before you can afford to put the trees in. So that's where I'm at the moment. So yeah, effectively, what is the role, what's the opportunity, what are the challenges for integrating trees? The question is particularly into our hill country environments, but yeah, we'll start with pastoral stuff, and if Ross or someone have got a comment on the flat land, then we'll take that too. So Jules, you've got the mic.
Trees are not my expertise, although as a child I had quite a plan to plant trees all over my dad's farm. And the one we're currently managing at the moment, we've actually worked with Karma from Greenbridge to draw up a real plan and try and understand the impact trees have on the landscape and understand how they create those microclimates and pour moisture and biodiversity into the system. The other thing that really interests me in tree planting, which we have pretty much a clean slate to go at, is how do we incorporate, real vertical grazing opportunities and use trees in that sense in our livestock operation as well. But I think silviculture and hedgerows and changing our climate insofar as the microclimate through our planting of trees is something that I personally would like to see a lot more done and intend to get into it.
Yeah, I suppose we've planted a lot of poplars and willows and stuff over the years, and my father always used to pollard them every summer in Hawke's Bay. It was a huge part of getting the stock through dry summers. So yeah, certainly last year I did a lot of that. I haven't got a tractor, so I still left a hell of a mess. But if you're planting poplars and willows, being able to pollard them basically from even 5 years onwards, every year, do a third of them, or hold back and use them as a summer feed source, is pretty awesome. So you're covering your erosion issues as well as a terrific feed source for stock. Everyone knows about pollarding, so basically you've got to cut the top part of the tree off at about, ideally, sort of 2 to 2.5 metres, so that the cattle can't eat the regrowth the next year, and then you end up with basically a trunk and a big bulb of foliage that sort of grows more and more, and then you just come through in a few more years and cut it down again, and it gets easier. So, but it's a bit of a shame when some of the trees have been left too long, and then trying to cut down a poplar that's that size, and you're trying to get up a ladder and cut it down and go anywhere. It's a bit difficult, so you definitely do them young. But big opportunities here.
Not on my farm, but I've visited quite a few farms now, and the best one I've seen is a little organic farm in Waikato, had trees around every one of his paddocks, and they're all edible by cows. So he was saying like his paddocks were like flat, and then his cows could eat up 1.5 meters. You know, so he's extended his platform by quite a bit. And also the shade. He said in the morning half the paddock was shaded in the summer, and then in the afternoon the other half. So only getting half that heat. Yeah, I was really impressed with that. Something we want to do, but it's a bit more difficult on our sort of country. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, just to add up, because I thought about that so much, I just think that, you know, once, you know, again, on the hill country side of things, I think we're getting to a point where we can start to get our heads around the grazing thing and that general management and that. You know, the next frontier of what's possible is really a really clever intentional integration of trees into that, and there's a huge amount of research around the animal performance benefits of shade and shelter, like up to 30% better animal performance on the same volume of feed, let alone the fact that you can actually grow more feed if you design it right, especially through summer. You can hold on to quality and actually have something you can utilise. And I was talking to an ag research guy a couple of years ago when I was researching for another thing, and I said, what's the hill country research opportunity that no one's talking about? And he said, oh, I thought about that quite a lot. He said, the impact of wind across our pasture and soil surfaces and the amount of moisture we lose purely just because of because most of this country gets pretty decent winds through late spring and summer. And that was from one of the ag research guys. And so just thinking about, what are the opportunities for us to break that up? There's everyone has different views on carbon markets and that kind of stuff, but my question is, can we actually get carbon emitters that are wanting to put money in offset things to actually pay for us to put trees in our farms? We don't need to make money out of it. The money comes when we get the benefits and the resilience and that kind of stuff. But cash flowing these kind of developments is the real challenge. So is that actually an opportunity just for us to bring that kind of capital investment into our farms where otherwise we couldn't? So if anyone wants to bounce ideas, I can go on for hours about that. Ross or Simon, do you want to add anything quickly on that?
Yeah, just really quickly, I did a presentation at a carbon farming conference a couple of years ago, and that's irrelevant, but the other people who were speaking there were talking about agroforestry and the opportunity for carbon credits, and you only have to have 30% canopy at maturity to claim carbon credits. So there's a fairly big opportunity there, I think, to have 60% of your farm to collect some money for doing nothing, which sounds ideal to me, but
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think I anticipate those rules, that 30% canopy cover, changing over time. It was kind of limited by the fact that when they set up those rules, it was like, well, they couldn't accurately measure every tree, for example, or every tonne of carbon and that kind of stuff. But with the technology we've got these days and the cost of it coming down, I hope that we're actually not far away from every shoulder belt gets mapped and quantified. Probably not 10 trees per hectare, you wouldn't bother, but actually open the door to a whole lot more different designs and that kind of stuff, rather than, I know like Greg Hart at Wairarapa, for example, has been planting some rows designed for that kind of stuff, and they're pretty tight, narrow north face roads that he's had to plant in order to get that kind of canopy cover, and that comes with its own management challenges around cattle walking up and down big long strips and that kind of stuff, and creating tracks, and you've really got to change your management. So anyway, I'll stop there because I've gone for a long time there. Right, last question. I guess we're thinking about the future of, more broadly about the future of farming, agriculture, energy, with the whole, it's not just climate change in my opinion, it's that kind of whole, where's our energy coming from in the future, what are our resources coming from, and I guess perhaps we frame this question as where do you hope you can get to with your current systems from that perspective? Like, what's the energy balance going to look like for your farms in 5 to 10 years' time, relative to either where they started or those around you? If that question makes enough sense, you have a crack at that, and then we'll call it quits. And Simon.
When we first started Untitled in the mid-70s, our diesel consumption went down by 90% in comparison to conventional. Nowadays it's more like 70% as cultivation techniques have got less intensive and more efficient. I did a carbon budget in 2002, and 78% of our carbon energy input came from the use of fertiliser. And the majority of that was from urea because it's so energy intensive. And that was including analysing all the machinery. So when a machine is the mining of the ore, the manufacturing of the machine, the transferring it across the world to the farm, and then the operational life use. So it included all those sorts of things with the figures that were available at the time. But I was quite astounded by how much of it was fertiliser and how little of it was fuel. So we're working on it.
Yeah, that's probably been my only observation as well, when we're probably burning up to 50 litres of diesel a hectare or so to get a crop in the ground with full cultivation, and I can direct drill a hectare for 2 litres of diesel. So yeah, it's a pretty profound difference.
I think there's probably a lot of fuel that's used on sheep and beef farms that people don't really realise, and are running around on our quads and our side-by-sides, and they actually use an incredible amount of fuel when you compare it to your hometown car. And I can see that chasing production and chasing a high level of production does have us farming in a way that has us running around all over the place at 90 miles an hour on a piece of equipment. And I do see that down the road as people look more for profitability in the farm system rather than production being the yardstick, I think we will naturally lower our carbon footprint by the use of a lot of the equipment we do use and the inputs we reach for.
I think for us, our biggest energy that we sort of buy in would be feed, and that's in our plan going forward. So as our management gets better and the soil gets better and we grow more, we're hoping to slowly drop that out. Another transition, sort of, I don't want to drop it out straight away, but that's how I see our energy use keep on going down. So.
Most of the farms I worked on didn't have a tractor and barely had a motorbike, so it was all horses and stuff. So we burn more gas now on a little farm than we did on some of the big ones. But I think that soil carbon area that we can sort of push along is probably our biggest environmental positive thing. So measuring soil carbon and seeing those increases, and I know someone said before that you saying that our soils are already really high in carbon, but I've seen my farm change in 5 years, and I can guarantee that is not the case that we are at full carbon. The ability for us to sequester way more is massive. So yeah, it's been more so.
Just like to add one more thing, and I think it goes hand in hand with what we're at work on the farm, which is creating a local food system, and a huge amount of energy goes into transporting food that we eat on a daily basis. And I think if we can look, out ahead of time and address how do we create local food systems that eliminate a lot of the trucking of things all around the world. And that's all carbon emissions where half of us are not even conscious of. And just to add to what you said about the stable carbon pool, again, I get to run all over this country and dig holes, and the average rooting depth in most pastoral situations, it may be between 50 millimetres, 150 is really good going. And it's people like Miah who are actually getting their rooting depth way down there, who are actually the people who are building that stable carbon pool, and that's the one we're also interested in. And I think we haven't even started to tap that opportunity as a country.
I'm not sure what that analysis of New Zealand soil carbon levels, how deep
it's not.
That was measured to 150.
Well, they've gone a bit deeper, but talk to Louis Shipper about it.
Yeah.
It's not much.
So, I mean, you can always fudge the figures to make it look as though you're doing a good job.
I've looked into a bit of that, and a lot of that research from what I recall, so I think it went down 600 on average, but it wasn't looking at, you know, it was like looking at, well, what's a long-term continuous sheep beef farm doing, for example, a long time. So it's not measuring what the opportunity is in terms of change, it's what they've used for carbon accounting at a national level, which is benchmarking, like what's the whole country doing on average. It's not looking at what's possible, so I think they're two different questions really. And the latter one hasn't really been asked yet, although I think it's starting to be.
And they haven't been measuring a healthy system.
No,
they've been measuring a degraded system.
Yeah.
So, that's right.
Cool. Right, well, we're going to wrap up there and probably just a round of applause. Thanks very much for the panel.
I'm looking for Sam. Thank you very
yes.
much.
Yes, Quorum and Sky.
Well, I was just about again, big thanks to you guys, big thanks to Sky for helping organise. It does take a wee bit of effort to pull these things together, and can't do it without it. And same with Dean for he's basically been on his feet all day while the rest of us get to sit down in between things, so much appreciated, Dean. And you'll see a bit of Dean's work coming out in some of the video case studies. So there's a couple out now, and there's be a whole heap more coming out through winter, so check out the Quorum Exchange website or whatever social pages you're on there. There's a heap of content starting to roll out, which we're pretty excited about. Obviously, Carterton events venue, they won't be able to hear me, but thanks very much. And same to the caterers, which is the Cleveland Bakery. Now, just a couple of things. So these videos, obviously we're recording the whole thing and we're going to chuck them up online. They'll go, I'm not sure if they'll go on a YouTube channel or up on the website, but either way, they'll be open. We know that farmers spend quite a lot of their time over the winter often watching these kind of things, so when they come out, feel free to share them with others that you think might get something out of it. And hopefully people get a bit more out of value than just those that are here in the room today. In terms of keeping in touch with Quorum Sense, if you're not already, as I said kind of earlier, we're kind of trying to develop better ways that we can keep people engaged, because not everyone likes Facebook and big Facebook following, and our WhatsApp events and opportunities come on that. So if you're not in that newsletter, jump on and it'll keep you posted with what's coming up. And as our opportunities do come up to be engaged in different ways, they'll definitely come through that. So you make sure that you don't miss those long term. We also might flick you a bit of a survey after this, just because we're constantly trying to iterate and figure out what works best for you in terms of your learning opportunity. Now, usually we try and find a building with natural light, but we couldn't find any that were available in Carterton. So thanks for bearing with us and sitting in a room that feels a bit disconnected from the world.